Be seated. As I read this gospel this week and considered its message, there's a story that kept coming to mind from American history. And it's a story that breaks my heart when I hear it, but also fills me with hope at the same time. And it happened on April 4th, 1865 in Richmond, Virginia, just 10 days before Abraham Lincoln would be assassinated. Lincoln had endured 4 years of unimaginable burden. The presidency aged him decades. Every morning brought news of thousands more dead. Every decision he made meant more people mourning the loss of children. His own son, Willie, had died in the White House. His wife, Mary, probably because of her son's death, struggled with mental illness. The newspapers vilified him daily. Political enemies, even in his own party, called him a tyrant. They called him a failure. They called him worse. He should have entered this city, Richmond, Virginia, with Lee on the run for the first time in a long time, soon to surrender. He should have entered it in triumph. It should have been a big moment. Were this to happen in 2025, there would have been Facebook Live videos. There would have been posters building up to the moment. It would have been a big scene. And Lincoln could have used, even in his day, this moment to claim some victory, to gloat, to finally have a moment in the sun. But that was not the kind of man Lincoln was. Instead, Lincoln walked quietly from the boat through the dangerous streets to the Capitol with just his 12-year-old son, Tad, whose birthday it was, and 2 Navy guards. He entered the city understanding that all the suffering and loss everyone had endured was something he had a hand in. And then something extraordinary happened. As he enters the city, just on the outskirts, there's a group of newly freed slaves gathered by a fire. And one of the slaves yells, "Father Abraham!" And everyone got quiet and they looked. And he's there in his long coat and his hat. He's one of the most recognizable people in the world. And he says, "Good morning, friends. I just came to see your city." And he keeps walking. And soon the word spreads. Abraham has come. And former slaves begin to gather. Overwhelming joy is in their voices. They fall to their knees, calling out in gratitude to this man, praising him for their freedom. Lincoln is grabbing them, pulling them up, saying, "No, friend, walk with me." And they put their arms around him. They hug him. And his guards are nervous. They say, "What do we do?" He says, "Do nothing." And they begin to sing songs of joy and praise as they walk to the Capitol. By the time he arrives, there are thousands with him gathered singing. And Lincoln is in tears. Here finally were voices. And these were the voices that really mattered, saying he had done something good. And it wasn't from politicians, it wasn't from generals or newspaper editors, but it was from what Jesus would have called the least of these. As we read in Matthew 25, Jesus tells us that when we serve the hungry, the thirsty, the stranger, the prisoner, when we serve the least of these, we serve him. In that broken street, in Richmond, I believe that Lincoln heard the voice of Christ. Not in a grand pronouncement, not in an official ceremony, but in the grateful words of people who had been enslaved, who had been counted as property, who 2 days before were less than human. These were the people who could see what Lincoln had done. They were the ones who understood the cost of his decisions. They were the ones whose freedom had been bought with sleepless nights and broken hearts. And Lincoln, because of his humility, was able to receive their blessing. He didn't just hear them, he was moved by them. He pleaded with them not to kneel, not because he rejected their gratitude, but because he saw their dignity. He embraced them with joy as fellow children of God. And here is the beautiful paradox of Jesus' teaching in our gospel this morning about taking the lower place. When we live in such a way that we don't grasp for honor or recognition, we become able to receive blessing that matters. We're able to hear God's voice say, "Friend, move up to a better place. Why are you sitting there?" If Lincoln had entered Richmond the way most politicians would have entered Richmond, he would have missed the most important moment of his presidency. But his natural humility opened him up to receive what might have been the only pure affirmation he ever received. The freed people of Richmond weren't thinking about politics or strategy or historical legacy. They were just grateful. And they recognized someone who had suffered for their sake. They saw past criticism and controversy. They saw past his failures and mistakes to the heart of what he had done. How often do we miss God's voice because we are looking for it in the wrong places? We wait for the approval of those that we think matter, the successful, the powerful, the influential. And we measure our worth by recognition from those who occupy places of honor. But Jesus tells us the first will be last, and the last will be first. He tells us that God has chosen the foolish things of the world to shame the wise, and the weak things to shame the strong. Humility is not a technique. It's not a strategy. Humility is found in suffering, in the daily experience of carrying burdens that are too heavy to bear alone. Humility comes from knowing you are not sufficient for the task before you and that you need help beyond yourself. This kind of humility, the kind of humility Jesus is calling us to, will cost us. It means being misunderstood, being criticized, being lonely in your decisions. It means caring more about doing right than looking right. It means serving even when no one seems to notice or care. But it also means hearing God's voice say, "Well done." 10 days after this moment, Lincoln was gone, murdered by someone who could not see past their hatred. But those former slaves in Richmond had given him something precious in his last days. Some assurance that all of that suffering had some meaning and that all of that sacrifice had a purpose. This is what Jesus promises us. Not that we'll be rewarded with worldly honor, but that we'll be blessed with something more valuable. God's voice telling us, "Well done," Come sit by me.